All right, guys, let's jump right into preparation styles for partial coverage. And I want to talk about this case in particular. This is a case from a few weeks ago, a very quick case of mine that I did chairside. And I did 3D printed quadrant of onlays and inlays here. And it was kind of a real world case that I wanted to show you. There's a lot of errors in my prep here that I wish I could have changed just a little bit, but there's also a lot of good features that I want to go over. Again, I love doing partial coverage restorations. It's been the foundation of my practice for the past 15 years. I very rarely resort to full coverage crowns unless I absolutely have to. And we have some really cool evidence in the literature to support partial coverage as a viable alternative to crowns, and in particular, bonded adhesive restorations like 3D printed resins or ceramic like Emax, and even Empress and Vitamark II are phenomenal materials. And so I think people always like to focus on the wrong things when they look at this. They tend to want to get into partial coverage. They have the desire to be more conservative, but then they focus on things like resin cement and what's the best cement to use and things like that. And they fail to kind of try to better themselves as it relates to tooth preparation styles. And I think actually the tooth preparation is the most important part of the whole kind of puzzle. And then, of course, followed by proper bonding and isolation. But I think the confusion exists in tooth preparation styles because they stopped teaching this in dental school a while ago. Many schools just do full, you go from a filling to a crown and there's nothing in between. It's kind of sad reality of a lot of schools. But let's talk about this. I have lived by these kind of rules that I'm going to throw up on the screen here for the past 15 years. They've never let me down. The first kind of most common sense thing that I'm going to talk about is cusp thickness remaining. You know, we all have this fear of dentists that we're going to get a call on Christmas Eve and a patient's going to bite down on something and a cusp is going to pop off of the onlay that you just did. We hear these horror stories. They're actually, it's very rare for me. And actually in the literature, a cusp breaking off of an onlay is extremely, extremely rare. And they have, it's just not something that happens. I think this is a fairy tale that we tell ourselves, or we heard of a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, cousin's mother's brother's sister that popped a cusp off of an onlay. This just doesn't happen, guys. If you do these rules that I'm going to talk about, the cusps aren't going to just self-destruct and fall off the tooth. So let's talk about it. The first one is that you want your remaining cusp to be 2 millimeters thick if you're going to keep it. And this is kind of a very conservative number. You could go thinner than this, but this is a number that has been floating around the literature for quite a while. And so if you look here, any cusp that's remaining, I'm going to just color this non-functional cusp here. This is the distolingual cusp of 30 that I kept. And the way that I like to measure this clinically is there's actually a tool that is looks like a kind of a tuning fork that has a 2 millimeter gap. That tool, I'm going to throw it up here on the screen if you like it. That you just slide it over the cusp, and if it slides down, it's way too thin. You got to cover it 100% of the time. Or you could use just like a probe or something like that if you're just kind of wanting to do something super quick. Nothing wrong with that. So a probe, you would lay it like right across, and you're measuring this kind of width right here. This should be about 2 millimeters there. Okay, so if a cusp is 2 millimeters thick or more, I'm probably going to really eye that cusp and think, hey, can I save it or should I cover it? If it's less than 2, it's just a no-brainer. It's getting covered no matter what, all day long, twice on Sunday, it's getting covered. Okay, so then other than that, we also look at preoperative occlusal contact points on the cusp. And this is a concept that is from Graham Milicic. If you ever have a chance to hear him talk, you should definitely, he's a phenomenal biomimetic dentist. Talks about the enamel, the enamel biorim and the compression dome of the tooth and all these kind of really cool kind of engineering ideas that he's applied to tooth structure. Now, one of the things that he talks about, which is not really based off of evidence, it's just from experience, is this concept of the compression and tension contact point. And let me explain that to you, because I've been doing this. I heard him speak it must have been 12 years ago or something like that, maybe more. And it changed the way that I think about dentistry. One of the things that I really think is a cool thing that has saved me many a times is this concept of the compression versus tension contact point. And so what that means is preoperatively, you want to check the bite on the quadrant that you're working on. And if you have a contact, let me just change this to blue maybe, so it shows up a little bit better. If you have a contact like this, okay, on, say, the outer surface of this tooth, which is very common here on the mandibular molar, the vector of force is such that it's pushing that cusp towards the center of the tooth like that. He would explain that this is a safe contact point, that you want to keep as many cusps as you can that have had this contact point. And this has turned out to be so true for me. Usually I find that cusps that have been under compression like this are very healthy and very rarely ever fractured. You know, oftentimes you'll look for like tiny little fractures down here. And now with modern near infrared transillumination, we could kind of look even closer than before. So that is a compression contact. You want to keep it, but it also has to meet the 2 millimeter rule. Now, let me just back up some. If a contact is under tension, so tension, you want to cover it, even if it meets the 2 millimeter rule in a lot of cases. So what is a tension contact point? Let me draw one for you. Usually it's on the inclined plane, transverse ridge of a cusp. So if you look like that, that is very slightly putting that cusp under tension, where if a patient bites down on that every single day, it's pushing that cusp off of the tooth like that. And oftentimes you'll see little tiny cracks down here if you look very closely with a tension cusp. And so you can better demonstrate that on this premolar right here. If I have a cusp right here on the inclined plane of the transverse ridge, that's pushing this cusp this way, okay? You actually oftentimes find these on non-functional cusps. So very often you'll find them somewhere like here, pushing the non-functional cusp off like that. Very common actually on mesial lingual cusps of mandibular molars. You also want to check excursive movements too and see if it's a tension contact during excursives, because then that would necessitate covering. And so a lot of times you'll find that you want to save a cusp, but because it's under tension, you're going to cover it. That is the case of this cusp, okay? Now there's multiple ways you cover cusps. We'll get into that in a minute. But again, let's just go over the compression tension one more time here to explain that the tooth needs to be with a contact point on a remaining cusp that's under compression. Now, it doesn't matter if you say, let's say the patient had a tension contact right here, and you're like, well, no problem. I'm just going to go ahead and equilibrate the maxillary tooth, and it's no longer going to be a tension contact, and we'll therefore put that in a much better condition. Unfortunately, it's more of a historical contact issue than it is a future contact issue, because historically, if the patient has had a contact there in the past, let's say, decade or so, they have been pounding that cusp in a very pathologic way, oftentimes severely weakening that cusp. And so if you keep it, more than likely you'll regret it, because typically, if in fact with near infrared, you could often see tons of little cracks around those cusps. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about just general stylistic tooth preparation. Now these preps are far from perfect, and there's a lot of things that I would do different, but I want to talk about some positives and negatives here. Let's start with 29. There's a lot of people that would say you need to extend this preparation for retention. In fact, this was a common comment that they wanted it to come kind of GV black, like this kind of extension for prevention. There is nothing really wrong with that idea, except that it's kind of based off of fear rather than science. It's based off of the fear that this restoration is going to debond in some form or fashion, and therefore a mechanical kind of dovetail here with a bigger pulpal floor would be beneficial. Unfortunately, that's just really not based off of any evidence to support that this style of preparation is better than a more conservative style preparation, which, this is not a slop prep. There is a actual pulpal floor right here, and there is an axial wall coming down here, and there's axial walls here. This is not a slot prep. This is actually has plenty of horizontal stop right here. And if you include the floor of the box, we have two big plateaus. Okay, so, I would actually rather this debond and fall out than debond and stay locked in from some dovetail and get a giant mega cavity underneath it. I just don't agree with this theory at all. And I think it's, people that are still into some GV black stuff. Okay, so with that said, let's look at this preparation. There's a few things that we need to talk about. Number one is that you want to avoid sharp corners of your box, and you want to avoid a narrow box, which is very easy to do on a premolar. It's easy to accidentally make a narrow box. And so the floor of your box, if you will, and it's not really a box at this point, needs to be at least 1 millimeter. Okay. Now, this prep is far from perfect. You see how it constricts right here and makes like a point, whereas here we have a more ideal form. That is an area right here where I could do better next time, kind of right here. I'm going to put an arrow. And I like looking at my preps like this because it helps me get better. Now that I'm looking at that, there's a few other things I want to point out. One, I scanned under rubber dam and I have Teflon tape packed in the sulcus, which really helps with isolation. But besides that, there is kind of a sacred area of this prep that a lot of people screw up when they're first learning. I'm going to go ahead and make this lime green. It's these corners right here, and I barely have one, but it's right here. People tend, when they're first learning, to think amalgam preps, and they undercut the bejeepers out of these corners. You really can't do that for indirect restorations at all. In fact, you kind of have to almost think of this as one continuous wall here and kind of up here. It makes kind of a C, or U, I guess you would say. This is kind of all one smooth surface with no box form, no line angles. It's kind of just one nice continuous preparation like that, almost like a perfect little U shape there, okay? And that trend continues, where it actually then continues into this axial wall here, and it's nice and smooth and round, and it's just something that is almost like a continuous band like this. So if I look straight down, I should see the full thickness of that band all the way around my prep when I look at the path of insertion, which is kind of from the occlusal view right here. That should just be one big continuous band. Okay, so on my prep, I could have did a little bit better job on this particular tooth of not constricting, let's see, right here, like I said before, but I also could have did a little bit better of a job at like sharpening just a tiny bit where my axial wall meets my pulpal floor. Okay, that could have been a little bit better done. That helps sometimes just to be nice and distinct. I almost have like, it's almost too round, where I just come down and this kind of angle right here is almost like a slope. Now, one area that you really do want to round pretty extensively, and I did a pretty good job here, is this axial pulpal line angle. You want to keep that super round. You want to avoid sharp corner there. And if you look at the kind of angle, this is a flat pulpal floor, and then it goes down to your axial wall here. This corner is super round, okay? So keep that in mind when you're doing this. I polish this corner typically. I use a ultra small, fine egg-shaped diamond, and I just hit that to round this corner. Okay. All right, so now moving on, let's take a look at this number 30 here. Now, I decided to cover that mesial buccal cusp. Let's look at the angle here from the straight facial. Now, I always over-exaggerate my taper here, and this is back from my milling days because my mills tend to just really like over-taper walls like this. New users have a very common problem of undercutting this wall. I see it all the time. It's very easy to do, and you would do something more like this with that angle. That is a problem that would cause a restoration that can't fit. So I kind of over exaggerate and I over taper. Well, how much do I like to go? I usually like to go 20 degrees if I can, is my target, and I tend to sometimes do just a little bit more. That is something that is ultra critical. Another thing you want to avoid is accidentally just slightly undercutting that corner right there. It's very easy to do, very common mistake. Or to make this surface convex like this. It's very common to do something like that. Okay, so that is a very, very big, that corner there is a critical corner. I don't know why I can't connect these dots. There we go. See, all eyes should be on that corner when you're prepping this. Okay, you want to make sure to keep that very, very focused there. Now, let me just erase that. This cusp was covered, and it was, I intended to create a butt joint margin, I did, where it's covered quite aggressively. Let's see, I would imagine that this is maybe just a little bit too aggressive, but of a cover, I could have actually probably kept it higher up. Like for example, maybe right around here, this line is where I could have kept it. So I'm probably a millimeter or so, just a little bit too much reduced there. But with that said, it is a butt joint margin. There is no extra finish line. A lot of people, when they're first learning, they like to make these slots, boxes, grooves, bevels, and all these weird things. And so they would come down here with this thing, and they would just like come and just do like some weird thing like this and make it like almost equal with the tissue, or actually with the floor of the box here. Or some people just come all the way down to the tissue and they create like a little margin. And this would all be like an axial wall here. That is completely unnecessary. In fact, I think that's my least favorite way to cover cusp. I prefer a butt joint margin with a 110 degree exit angle if I can. So what does that mean? If I zoom in right here and I kind of write this slope right here is 110 degrees. And what that does is it increases the, this is the enamel band of enamel right here. It increases the thickness of enamel. It bisects those enamel rods because the way that they run is actually kind of this way. And they straighten out right about here, and then they start to curve down. So you bisect the enamel rods, you increase the enamel rod surface area, but you also aesthetically create this kind of long bevel that the restoration is going to blend in when bonding much better with that versus a 90 degree sharp exit angle. So moving on and continuing with this prep, I think the hardest part when people start to do these is, so you cover cusp here, and now you got to go all the way down to the tissue here, and how do you connect those dots? So basically, if you look, this area right here is a very difficult band for people to prep. What I like to think, and this is just me, I like to avoid any types of boxes or horizontal or vertical drop-offs, I should say there. And so this is just a gentle slope. It's almost like if you were like a little person walking right here, you could just walk right down this slope. You could probably be in a wheelchair and just comfortably go down this. You don't want to just look down some giant cliff there. I don't know if there's a better way to explain it, but for me, this is a road, if you will, or this is a road, one continuous road, and it should be very smooth with no giant vertical drop-offs. You could see the kind of remnants of a box form here, just like this. Very subtle. You want to be careful here. You want to avoid sharp, distinct boxes. And even if I look at this wall right here, if I zoom in, the corners here are very rounded. So what I mean is this is super rounded into the floor of the box. We go from a horizontal wall and we basically round those corners. And that is by using like a 847 KR 018 or something like that has, so the diamond will look rounded at the corners versus square. So what I mean, if you look at the diamond, it's very rounded at the tip like this. And so these round corners are going to help create that round angle. All right, let's keep moving on here. You want to try to keep this line sharp and distinct here without undercutting it. You want to kind of dig the corner of the burr right into those areas on slower speed and let the burr touch the whole wall here, and you're trying to hold it relatively parallel to the long axis of the tooth. The burr has a built-in taper, and that's how you're creating that taper along these walls. And again, avoid sharp corners to the box here. It should be, see how this one's perfectly round there. Here on my distal lingual, you can see just a little remnant of a box form. That's okay, as long as it's rounded and not undercut and sharp. You could see now I like to break contact pretty extensively here with the reverse S. And so this reverse S shape right here and here allows for 110, this exit angle here to be pretty 110 degree exit angle. You could see it here on the mesial as well, this kind of reverse S shape here. And when you want to avoid creating a crab claw, which is like a kind of a slang for unsupported enamel, and the way that those tend to look, let me just change to black here. If you come here like this and you come like that and you create this little spike of enamel like this, that is a very bad exit angle. You almost want to err on this angle here to be 90 degrees or 110 degrees, okay? Let's see, moving on. Here on number 31, I don't love this prep. The thing that bothers me about this prep is a few things. Is I don't like that the box constricts. So here and here, we have different widths. That is a kind of a symmetrical error that bothers my eye. I kind of made this wall too rounded in a way. It's not quite as sharp and defined as I would liked it to be. I did a pretty decent job at making this line distinct. I always do that. What I do is I just turn the water off. I turn the speed on super slow. And I take that diamond and I hold it in my hand, kind of, it'd be shaped, it'd be like this. This is my handpiece. I hold it kind of straight up, the parallel to the long axis of the tooth, and I just polish these walls. Kind of, you could do it almost over and over again. You're basically just sanding those walls. And you also, when you do that, you want to sand, you can kind of see it here. You want to make sure that you're getting this wall. And when you do these walls here on your boxes, the entire burr should touch that wall. The entire burr. I see too many people just using the tip, and when inevitably, if you just use the tip there, you're going to undercut the corner of the box down here, or you're going to create some weird shape. The burr should actually do all the hard work for you. It's run all along these walls just like this, and you're basically creating a perfectly smooth wall. The floor here, you can have some irregularities in your floor. You don't arbitrarily flatten out your floor for aesthetics. Instead, what you do is you flow some base material down there. I like to use Flowable Composite. You bond it and you flow it in there, and you use your probe and you spread it all smooth, and then you prep on top of it. That's how you create the smooth, pretty preparation style versus just taking a burr and mowing it all flat. Okay. Anyway, I hope this helps you guys. There's just some little things that I could have done better here, and I like looking at my preps like this so that I could get better in the future with my preparations as well. So maybe we could learn together. If you like this, comment, and I could do more of these styles of videos, and we could all kind of learn together.